Welcome to the South Burlington School Board meeting. And I'll start with any comments from the public regarding items that are not on the agenda. Yes, sir.
You don't need to have a mic or...
You can have a seat right up
Yeah.
there. Perfect. Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, I'd like to comment on the legislative report that Martin put in the other paper this week, and a part that specifically pertains to schools, the general articles about the press freedom bill that shields reporters from giving up confidential sources and thus whistleblowers, et cetera, et cetera. And then he goes on to say that in a separate statute, Act 49, related to miscellaneous education issues, essentially the same protections are given to college journalists vis-a-vis their administration that regular journalists are given vis-a-vis public officials. And then goes on to say that for elementary and high school journalists get many of the same protections, although somewhat limited. Can't do slander, gratuitous profanity, et cetera, et cetera. What I would like, and if I may read a very brief section just so I get this right. Most importantly, the law provides that content shall not be suppressed solely because it involves political or controversial subject matter or is critical to the school or its administration. That was in quotes from the law. Then Martin goes on to say briefly, this provision eliminates a frequently invoked basis for school administrators' exercise of censorship. The concern that the proposed publication may be controversial or potentially embarrassing. I found that extremely interesting. It's the first time apparently this conversation went on the Judiciary Committee, and I assumed it also went on the House floor. It's the first time I have known the legislature to somewhat formally discuss that school administrators are not always champions of transparency. And I confirmed with former Speaker of the House, Shap Smith, 2 days ago that that was part of the floor discussion. As a longtime school board member, the fact that administrators do not always want maximum transparency is not a surprise to me, and this is certainly not their major tool of opposing that. But I would encourage the board to sort of take a breath and ask yourselves, are you running the most transparent school district you can run? And that's not critical of this board, and I'm much more sympathetic to school boards now than when I served on them, because a series of laws have been passed in the state that make your job much tougher than most of the time I was on school board. But if the answer to that question should be no, then I would also hope you would discuss how perhaps you could be more transparent. That's all I have to say, unless there are questions.
Great. Any questions or comments from the board?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just as an aside to that, I do think one of the areas that when we talk about, we've talked about community engagement too. I do think we should include dialogue about transparency. And I know, for instance, in the past, Martin, you're a good advocate to remind us around policy governance, for instance, and the practice of really looking at allowing administration to operate the schools, and where policy governance kind of gives the board the guidelines. I think transparency is a good conversation to include on a routine basis when we're discussing various topics. Are we being as transparent with the community as possible? So.
Yeah, and just one other comment about transparency in the context of policy governance. The transparency comes out to a large extent in the monitoring reports on the restrictions to what the administration can do to achieve the goals, but also, of course, on the metrics which we continue to work on how we're meeting the ends. That's part of the transparency, and we should keep that in mind.
Good. Any other comments? All right, we'll move on to any amendments to the agenda.
We need to add, Elizabeth, an amendment to the consent agenda. You need to add Jennifer Opal. I know that was also, it's in your It was not in your packet, but it is by your place as a handout. And so I just wanted to make that note.
Okay. All right, with that, announcements.
So you have a list of announcements, also by your place. And John, Aubin, and Bart have done a nice job just giving you a little kind of recap of some of the activities that are going on. I won't necessarily go through all of them, but some of you, I think, have seen a fair amount of activity in and around this campus. The windows, if you haven't noticed, have been, they've been battling, working in between the storms and the heavy rainfall, but they've been moving along, and those are actually been going in. I've had the pleasure to look out of my office and see them actually be put up in the last couple of days, so that's definite progress. The gym, if you haven't seen it, has also been refinished and has made a huge difference on the color, the brightness of that floor is quite shocking. ADA access to the bathrooms upstairs into high school has also been happening. The parking lot upgrade, the survey is now complete. We've been doing some other repaving, spot repaving, if you will. Rick Marcotte carpets have been replaced. Some burners, again, doesn't seem like you need it right now, but we will. Dead tree removals have been happening. We're in the process of doing that. Again, those of you who've been around when we have heavy wind going on, we're always looking at places where we need to be paying attention, particularly in this center medium. We've had some trees that have just over time have died, and the tops of them have been concerning, so they've been on top of. We're going to have some folks come in and get those. So anyway, the fire alarm upgrades, they also, if you've been on the property, you've been hearing the fire alarm go off. I feel bad for high school friends that have been hearing that, or Rick Marcotte folks who've been hearing those go off as well. Some other things to update. This is a little bit of an opportunity, a quiet time. Also, Kadisha, this is Kadisha. She's one of our custodians here. You probably have seen her over the years. You might even see her in the next couple of days if you're in and around the building. But she became a U.S. citizen in an event that was done down at Castleton. And so that was a nice event. A whole bunch of partners in Adventure Camp going on here on this site. This is actually, see, one of their agendas here are posted over here. They start their day out in here. Schools Out are full up with our Schools Out program, all kinds of camp activity going on there, along with our recreational partners. They're doing a lot as well for our children. And then last but not least is just for those of you who've been around our community for a long time, Ann Corley, and Patrick actually also put something out, but a longtime educator, community member, friends to many, friends to our community. She passed away. And just wanted to recognize that.
Great. Any other announcements? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to city and school collaboration.
So I think one probably would just be kind of the update on what we've heard around some of the resolution work. We have not had another city meeting with Kevin and Helen since the last board meeting. However, there was a resolution conversation that happened at the city council meeting this week, and so we're knowledgeable of that. I just wanted to make that known. I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah, I think we've got, we were asked, David and I met with Kevin and Helen, and were asked if we were interested in kind of signing off or participating in a possible resolution that calls for the creation of an airport authority for the Burlington International Airport, which really just looks at the current governance, and which right now is really, it's a department within a municipality, and South Burlington doesn't really participate as that municipality. So I think it's the resolution is really looking at some potential changes in governance. And looking at more of a regionally appointed airport authority. So you do have something to kind of look at that's a draft. We've requested through Tom Chittenden, city council member, what the time frame would be that the city council is looking to approve and present this resolution, and just to assess whether or not the school district wants to sign off on that as well, as another municipality within South Burlington who is affected by the airport. So I'll just ask that you take a look at that. Once we find out what the time frame is, we'll look to put it on a future agenda. Any other questions on that or comments at this point? Is there any additional information anyone would like to make sure we get from the city?
Not until I've had a chance to really review the resolution.
All right. All right.
So, I mean, if we put it on the next agenda for the second, should we see if somebody from the city council is available, or should we at least have that as a question that we should all answer by looking at the resolution and get a hold of David to weigh in on that?
I think maybe once you have a chance to look at it, if you think having it presented by a city council member would help the board make a decision, I think that's a good suggestion to make.
Okay.
All right. Anything else on city school? Okay. All right, we'll move on to Agenda 7, Superintendent's Report.
So the first item is an update on the professional learning in the school calendar. And I've provided some additional information. It's also by your place. It's exactly what I included in the packet, but then we've added some other information in there, kind of providing a little bit more of a back history on number of PD hours, et cetera, to assist in answering any questions that you might have as we move towards this calendar for next year. So let me pause there. Again, this is, I mean, I would just tell you that this is probably some of the hardest work that we have to do to try to figure out ways in which we can continue to be ready professionally as we have items that roll out that we're responsible to implement, while at the same time balancing education delivery to students. And so administratively, this has been a challenge. And I think we're feeling that the success of the late starts have been important. We recognize the challenge to moms and dads, but we think with good communication, we certainly have had some success there, particularly given the amount of work that needs to happen moving forward. I know we have Mark and Pat and Brent here that they've worked on this with our other administrators. If there's any specific question that you might have for them or myself.
And the one thing from a trending standpoint that I noticed is over the past 5 years, the middle school and high school, much of it is is this past year, David?
The 17-18, yep.
Yeah. So has really added 14 hours of professional development starting from the 2013-14 timeframe. And the elementary schools have added 5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the concerns that came up at the last board discussion was really the potential for diminished contact time with students. So I know for what's being proposed this year, it looks like a reduction of 2.5 hours at both the elementary and middle school and high school. But I guess the question is that additive to the 5 hours and 14 hours that has occurred over the past 5 years, so that now we're talking
Cumulative.
about 16.5 and 7.5 hours that is now made up of professional development time versus student contact time.
It's definitely a progression of added time needed. And again, so I don't want to be, not providing you that lens, that we have been adding time over the years. I think we've been adding time in a way that is most appropriate, however, for balancing instructional time. versus whole days off or even half days off for our middle and high. The late starts have been an important component where we are minimizing the amount of lost instruction time to the best that we can, given the schedule that we have 180 days.
A sort of follow-up to that question is, do you see a point once PLPs are sort of more settled and PVGRs are, have been around a little while longer, is there a point in the future where you might see the trend go back the other way, or is this just a continual expectation that we're kind of getting to a higher level and it's going to stay there?
So one of the things that I said in the last is, kind of at least holding this through 2020. But I think to your point is that when we know that we have these targeted expectations, and so this is implementation, and with implementation becomes, new training. So we're kind of in this implementation profession development. Now, that said, I'd like to say, once we get there, there won't be any other changes that are gonna happen professionally, but the likelihood of that, happening is probably not the case, although PBGRs might go down, something else might go up. I think it's safe to say, and I think the other administrators can weigh in on this, is, this is, if you're a seasoned educator, this is important work and you need to learn it. If you're a new educator coming into our system, it's likely that your education has provided you some level of, proficiency-based training, so that your uptick in learning will be quicker probably. But nonetheless, how we deliver it within the schools or within our system is also part of what has to happen as well. I don't know, Pat, Mark, or Brent, anything to add?
Well, I just want to say.
Or Stuart, sorry.
The last time there was a major change was 2 years ago, bringing it back to the board, and we've asked till 2020, when then it would be looked at again, so that the level certainly wouldn't change between now and 2020 from this level, either way, going down or going up. But as David said, Pat and I and Brent were in a meeting on the new Every Student Succeeds Act stuff from the state yesterday. There are these meetings happening throughout the state, and these are major shifts, regardless of what the federal government does in terms of accepting the final proposal, the responsibilities when we are going to have, the educational quality standards reviewed is a whole new system, and that's just a fact of life. And we want to do it right. We want to do it right for the kids. That's what it really gets down to.
The only thing I would add, Dave, Elizabeth, I don't know when you did your math on those hours. When we do our late starts, we change the schedule so that we don't have advisory and we shorten lunches a little bit, so the actual class time isn't shortened by, it's not a one-to-one loss. On those days, we don't have advisories. And so that actually can, and is starting to cause another problem for us, because we're shoehorning into advisory a lot of really important, work around PLPs and personalization, et cetera. But that is kind of a little bit of a trade-off that we make within the high school in terms of making sure that our academic courses aren't hit by, it's not a one-to-one. If we start an hour later, but we don't want our 35-minute advisory, we're really only losing 30 minutes of instructional time. And sometimes we squeeze lunches too. I don't know what our bell schedule is next year, but sometimes we squeeze lunches a little bit too, so it's even less of a change. In some years we get right back on. By the time lunch is over, we're running our normal bell schedule, so that the end of our day is actually no loss of instructional time. So it's not without a loss of instructional time, but we've been able to be a little creative within the schedule to mitigate that. So I don't know that hour analysis. I don't know if you're accounting for that in that analysis or not?
Probably not. It's the summary of the professional development hours for each of the
Right.
facilities over the
Yeah.
past
We
5
didn't-
years.
That's an accurate number.
Mhm.
So, because that is the time we get for professional development.
Mhm.
I just don't want that to be seen as automatically a loss on the.
Yeah, and I think that's what prompted the request by the board to look more specifically at the student impact time,
Yeah.
which now is documented. So it is 2.5 hours for each of the classes for the year. If this schedule is implemented over the next, that's a 3-year
Mhm.
period, correct?
Oh, I understand now. Now I understand your numbers.
I mean, it is lost
Yeah.
student contact time.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is, we can't go back retrospectively and say what creative solutions were developed that minimized loss of student contact time, but if you just look at the growth in professional development hours, in 2013 and 14, it was 30.5 hours
Mhm.
at the middle school and high school, and it was 54.5 this past year.
Right, right.
And I,
Not yet, in the coming.
Coming, actually, I misquoted that. This is
okay.
for.
So that's the
this is
coming year.
proposed,
So
yeah.
that was up
That's what I
8
hope.
hours
Yeah.
from that prior year.
Mhm.
That was my question there.
Mhm.
So under the recommended, it's a total of 14 hours, that professional development. And my guess is, as creative as you want to be, all that hasn't been covered. So,
Oh, no doubt.
yeah, I mean, my fundamental concern is really, are we fulfilling our state obligation of maximize, and it's 180 days, but really being clear that, I know there's days that if students are in school until, 1, it's counted as a full day.
Actually, fed lunch.
Fed
So the law
lunch, yeah.
reads,
So, I think it would be helpful to have some discipline around making sure we know what the contact hours are,
Mhm.
or contact time. And I think there's I've heard a lot of great solutions to sort of minimize that, but we clearly have started to eat into that a little bit. And it is a goal to optimize student contact time with, teachers and so forth. That is a goal of the district.
And we have the same goal. We'd like to get more time for professional development, and we would like to get more time with students, and how we do that in a 189-day contractual period is the challenge, particularly when we have, mandates that are coming down that we need to, respond to. And I would say, I don't want to say we're the greatest, but I know that, we have taken it extremely serious around backwards planning and implementing some of the things that we know are coming by certain dates, where others, of our colleagues are saying, I don't know what we're going to do. I just don't know what we're going to do. We're going to have to figure it out.
So if we were able to, and I know we have big reasons why we can't right now, but if we were able to move some of this into the faculty meeting time, would that allow us to reduce the decrease in the student contact time?
I think we would still need this, Martin. I think we would still need the same request. It would help us with some of the logistics and how we plan both the coordination of faculty meeting and what it is and how we transition. Yeah, I mean, I think, if we could make all the rules looser, then that would certainly be helpful. That would gain, I think, some, call back some additional time, but we would still need this. We make our faculty meetings. I've been at a lot of them. They make them very, very, productive. They hold them from kind of 7:30 to, I think, 7:30 to 8, and then 8 starts other initiatives on those things. I don't know, anybody care to?
3 to 3:45.
Yeah, for you guys, right? Yeah. So we still need it. Again, honestly, we need more time. But again, it's trying to plan out how we use the time that we have currently, and this added amount for us is important.
So this Schedule 2, David, would allow a fixed calendar that includes professional development for the next 3 years.
Again, this isn't a 3-year calendar, but it would be, we would push forward the same methodology to the 2 subsequent years. Mhm.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
Can I jump in for a second?
Mhm.
You know, for the elementary, the Friday afternoons is, you know, I think it's a really good time. It's, out of the 35 hours of the week, it's the probably least efficient, effective learning time. We often do, probably other schools do celebrations on those Friday afternoons, concerts, things like that. We push those things off to Friday afternoons as much as possible in all of our celebrations. So I just think that this is a very good attempt to minimize our loss of instructional time, our learning time.
How about learning time for teachers, though? Is that the?
That's what
We're trying to practice Friday afternoon. We get out. We don't do ours. There's a lot of learning that does happen Friday afternoon. It's after the bell, after, off campus.
Fair enough.
No, we'll make sure they're active learners.
So one of the most important things about this is that, you know, number one, your ability in asking us questions and where there's clarity needed, but more importantly, or most importantly, is to communicate it with our public. I mean, where we fall down is that moms, dads, and guardians don't know the schedule, haven't had the opportunity to coordinate, haven't had the opportunity to pay attention to the bus schedules, et cetera, of that nature. Partner with neighbors around care provisions and things of that nature. So it's really important, you know, for us, always has been, but this continues to be an area where we want to make sure communication is tight with our community.
So is there a plan to improve that or do that a little bit differently?
Well, I think this is part of it. You know, this is part of, you know, our sharing this with you folks and having this more in-depth conversation. And then administratively, we want to push this out in, you know, a variety of ways. So we'll be working to do that.
Though I don't like anecdotal evidence, but, and of one, but I know there were a number of occasions that this board member was all of a sudden surprised that the kids were not heading to the bus. And my daughter would, in fact, remember that and would remind my son that, no, you don't have to go to the bus. But I think, I mean, if there's a way to,
Yeah.
it'd be by email or something to give a little more of a heads up to the parents.
You're saying not just posting the calendar, but highlighting.
Not just posting the calendar necessarily.
We go out of our way for that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know what the elementary schools have been doing with it, because, yeah. Maybe you have to tweet more.
I'm impressed that your son was going to the bus and not when he could have been sleeping, actually. Most high school kids don't miss it. They
That's good.
usually tell me, hey, Mr. Burke, you know, Wednesday's a late start. Oh, that's right.
There's a good conversation that happens at the parking lot, like, what's going
Where's
on?
everybody?
We
Well,
have
you're here
not-
early, get your homework done.
We have offered to, the school's open too, by the way, so students will come at the regular time, and we're totally fine with that. And we've offered to our non-resident students, because the late starts for them are more of a hassle logistically, because they have to get, you know, high school kids in South Burlington can walk out the door and catch the bus. If you know, depending on how far off of Route 2 you live, if you're in Grand Isle, you've got or Georgia, you've got to get your kid to the bus, and so that's a little bit more of a problem. So I sent a survey to families in Georgia and Grand Isle and said, hey, I'll run the bus at the regular time. You know what I mean? And boy, was that a bad idea. Those people, don't you dare, if this comes, you know, because well, for a number of reasons, but one reason was, and I think anybody who lives in a high school knows that they want to sleep. You know, that's what they get. Way back, before we did late starts, we did early dismissals. And those actually were a hassle, because it was like, we were like it was like, release the hounds, you know? Whereas, and I didn't know where they were going, you know, and often it was unsupervised, and we just had no idea. And now it's like, they're just gonna sleep, you know, they which is what they do, or they'll come to school. And some of them have even latched on to, oh, that's a good time to have an informal club meeting. That's a good time to, get together and work on some stuff. So the school's open for students during that time, at the high school level. I don't want to pretend that's true, K, because I don't know.
Well, at the middle school, they actually have staff to monitor in the cafeteria on those days, because there's always 15 to 35 students who their parents have to
Certain
drop them off at the regular
circumstances don't
time.
allow, yeah.
It becomes a study hall at least, and so that is supervised time in this building. It's a little different with the elementaries where they'll be going home, but school's out, we'll start early on those days, and a variety of other ways that we will make sure that everybody connects.
I know you don't like anecdotes, but in 8 years, I've only received one complaint about early dismissals, and it was because of the recent one, because of the snow day that we made up, and the parent didn't know, but we had put it in 3 newsletters and sent out an email, but I know people are busy, and when my kids are small, I didn't get to the newsletters all the time either. But in 8 years, I've never received a complaint about it.
So I know this doesn't require any action, and I would like to just request that we develop some discipline around monitoring the student contact time. So should this discussion come up again in the future, there's some information that can be pointed to there.
Okay. Great. So moving on, new hire update. I put some information in your packet around the new hire date, and I know this generally comes up a lot during this particular time of the year, actually earlier than this time of the year, but we're behind for obvious reasons. So what we've done in your packet is we've also done a summary of the difference, so kind of tracking the differences where we are kind of from the last few board meetings where we started doing the hiring. And so I've provided that to you. And it kind of goes by the board meeting that we had back in July 10th, and then also in the June timeframe as well. And then the last page on that also summarizes then kind of in a summary form of where we are based on our targeted budget and then the actual salary. We're not done yet. I know that a lot of you would like information on where I'm at with FTE total count. I did send to you all a spreadsheet, although I know it wasn't that long ago this afternoon, but where you can look at teacher hires, you could look at support staff and administration. That will be added to our total FTE count. We are within our budgeted amount, but we still have positions that we have not yet hired. Again, part of that is because of the late budget approval. We're working diligently to try to get positions filled for those that either resigned or retired. So I hope this is helpful. Again, this was, and actually Meg did a good job on this for me, just trying to articulate that on ongoing and then do a summary for you as well. I don't know if that's helpful to you or if there's other things that you would like.
I will just say that the bottom right-hand corner number on the summary sheet should have parentheses around it. That was
Yep, thanks, John.
it's 200 under, not 200 over.
Yep, thanks.
I had two broad questions and then one specific question as I went through. And you've probably answered these before, but the broad ones. But one was sort of how the step is chosen for new hires, because for some of them, just based on, sort of the dates that they graduated, I was just trying to sort of back into, why someone might be hired at a step 5 when it looks like they have, 2 years of experience. I was just trying to understand how we decide where to place them on the grid.
So that's done with me. I've not delegated that to anyone else. When I first started, that was a delegated responsibility to me from the superintendent. When I meet with them, I look at obviously their degrees, their credentials beyond their degree, et cetera. But there's a provision in there, which is 9.1, I believe, of the contract. Could have that provision wrong. But it talks about other experiences. If you were in the Peace Corps, if you were in a variety of other experiences where you were in charge of students, and I say in charge and grading and responsible for their work, then that could count as full, part, or not. And so when I look at that, I look at those experiences where they've been in front of students. So in some cases where they may be only step 2, or you think step 2, and they're coming in at step 4, that's often the case that exists, that they've been granted some credit for some other experiences. Typically, if it's a fractional year, I may add fractional years, but again, I'm trying to be fair to their experience, and also fair to the district, around how we move forward financially.
And I guess my second question is in some cases, it seems like we're hiring what I would call pretty far up the index, as opposed to real entry-level people. There are some cases where we're hiring, masters plus 30 and, things like that. And I was, it's not every case, but I was just kind of surprised to see how many there were that were at the higher level. And I just didn't know if you could give us sort of more of a framework of how you sort of narrow down the pool of candidates, or maybe the pool is just not that deep and, this is what's there. But a couple of words on that would be helpful.
Fair question. So we do have hiring guidelines. Hiring guidelines are just that, guidelines around how, when we have vacant positions, how we go out and recruit new people to replace those folks that are transitioning. However, our hiring guidelines also, don't take into account the time frame of the year in which we're advertising and what the pool might look like. It also is not specific to the position, because some positions have we have higher need for content background or expertise. And then it's the whole pool that we're looking at, as I said earlier. So in some cases where we're over, part of that's a candidate pool.
Yeah.
Part of that's the level of experience and expertise that we need for the position, because if you're going to teach, in some cases, both French and German, for instance, you're likely going to be an individual that has that higher degree, higher number of experiences. If you're a special educator, you got to have a master's degree generally, and you're going to have some credits probably on that.
Okay.
So there are some examples in here, you're absolutely right, where we're over. And where we are over, the administrators, are in conversation with me around, David, we've got 3 candidates and this is what's happening.
Yeah.
And that's where the conversation happens. So again, we are over in some, but in summary, you can see that we're not over, although this is our opportunity. And I think, that we all know that. This is our opportunity to kind of recalibrate as we have transitions and changes in our staff.
And then my last question is a little bit more of a specific, it's an example on the second page, the art teacher at Chamberlain. I think we've had this conversation before. Sometimes, I don't think I'm the only one who finds this confusing, the way this is laid out sometimes, because we have a budget in here, but sometimes it appears that the budget is for the full FTE, and then sometimes on these partial FTEs, it appears that the budget is for partial FTE. It's just confusing whether we're comparing apples to apples in all of these cases. So for example, on this art teacher, the budgeted salary is $71,000. And I have to assume that that's for a full FTE, otherwise we'd be at 102 something, and nobody makes that. So I'm assuming that that's a full FTE, but then we're comparing this 0.7 FTE, and I'm assuming that the 40 is the partial salary for that 0.7. So we're getting, it looks like a great positive variance for the district, but it's just confusing the way the report is laid out, and that it's not always done the same way for each individual that's on the list. So it just makes it hard to compare how we're doing versus budget. So I would just request that in the future we sort of have just a couple extra words at the
Sure,
end
can do that.
of these lines that say this is the full salary or this is the partial, and that we do it on a consistent basis so it's easy to skim through here and see what we're looking at.
So one of the things in this particular, and I absolutely hear you, Bridget, this actual position, budgeted position, was actually at 0.8 because it had some 0.1 attached to it for other purposes. So this particular employee that left it was budgeted at 0.8, but the position the person that's coming in is actually at 0.7. So, and it is prorated at the 0.7. Did you want to say
I
something?
was just gonna say that
Yeah.
it's not 100%, it's at .8,
Yeah.
so it is a .1 off,
Yeah.
you know, from the position, but again, you know,
We could've-
positions are budgeted by whoever fills it before, you know, at that time, and that was somebody at the
I
time of
could
the
have,
schedule.
I could have articulated that better.
Well, yeah, I mean, so for example, you could say, you know, this is a 0.7 FTE that's replacing a 0.8 FTE who's going on
Gotcha.
leave. That would be
Fair.
enough to be able to back into it. You know, even better
question.
would be able to just have, this is the partial salary versus what the partial salary would have been for the same FTE
Yep.
percentage, because that would just be easier to see. But
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
So my desire on this would be, you know, I'll bring it back to you again on August 2nd, just kind of the new hire report, how kind of this, how we're doing. And as we get closer to the 16th, I'll have a updated on the actual FTE count, but we won't yet be done. I'd like to be done, but we probably won't be totally done. We'll still have some unfilled positions. If you notice on that spreadsheet, I did have some areas where we have held some position. For instance, the high school hasn't filled all of their sections or a fragment of that FTE, so we're watching those as well, and we'll be
So
communicating.
will we start the school year without a full staff then?
Our desire would be no, because we budget accordingly, we would like, and we need those positions. That's, I think, appropriate for me to articulate that. That said, depending on where we are right now, in some cases, we need committees, you know, which is right. And trying to coordinate schedules, as you all know, that's not always easy. So the administrators are currently in that struggle. Also for some of them, trying to take some time, you know, that's a vacation that they should have is equal in the complication of trying to fill those. So,
But the implication of that is there's, I understand we'll operate within the approved budget, but there's work, whether it's a classroom or whether it's a,
support person.
yeah,
that's
support
right.
person
You got
that
it.
needs to be, you know, addressed. So, I mean, how does that get accommodated if a position hasn't been filled?
So our goal is to fill all the positions. I'm just a little bit leery at the moment with what we don't have filled, that we're gonna get them all done on the first day. Mark?
At the elementary level, all the faculty, you said staff,
Yeah.
all the teaching positions are going to be full. We're, you know,
Yeah, and
that won't be an issue.
But that's-
Sometimes the interventionist, which takes a really select set of skills, might not be available, and we have to keep opening up. Maybe a paraeducator. So when you say staff, at least the elementary, we say some staff might not be filled right on day one, but all the faculty, all the teaching
Okay.
positions will be.
And I think for the high school, you know, some of the section, there is, you know, a .10 that's not yet, that may be scheduled wise, is probably not yet scheduled out. Fair, Patrick?
Yeah, and we just lost somebody this week. That was kind of a surprise. Who- whatever, was offered a contract, didn't sign it, got another job, so now we're having to scramble like an egg. But it's one class, one section.
At the high school level, is it sections that don't get offered, or is it
No, we get it done. Before we open, we'll staff this.
the sections? Okay.
I mean, I was articulating on the August 16th, you know, there's still a fair amount of time, you know, well, there isn't a lot, but for us, it's quite a bit of time between the 16th and the start of school. I'm just saying by the 16th, I may not have all those positions filled. The expectation is before we open the school, we'll have them filled, is our goal.
Well, and some of this, from my standpoint, is understanding. I mean, I think we are all going through the lessons learned on budget approval dates.
Yes.
And this seems to be sort of some of the downstream consequences, or not necessarily unintended, but unrealized consequences of the later approval date on the budget.
Yep. Okay, so, thanks for the feedback on the new hire stuff. The last part for me is talking about the homework procedures, that we wanted to make sure were clarified. Again, last year, as you know, Orchard and Mark and his staff move forward with conversations related to homework. It was important to all 3 elementary schools and to our district that we would be on the same in the same place. There's been a fair amount of conversation and time with the administrators and Stuart and Joanne and myself around this homework direction, we're calling it, at the elementary level. I think it's important. I mean, one of the things, and I said this in the very last sentence, is that, like, no homework is not the right kind of analogy that we want connected. We firmly believe in ongoing, every single day opportunity about reading. And then there's a variety of things that begin to wind in that are appropriate. And so this has been a conversation that we've had. The staff at their schools have also happened. I do think there's going to still be some lift that needs to happen with our parents and guardians as we open up school and explain that, connected to kind of the cognitive developments of our age groups and why and what you can do and how we can help you if there are frustrations that are happening at home. We did hear some of that in the past was, my child wants more, or I want to help them. What can I do? Where can I go? So there's been a fair amount of effort and work to make sure that's available for moms, dads, and guardians to do that.
Questions, comments?
I wish it was in place when my son was in elementary school.
I see that.
All right,
Okay.
thanks. All right, we'll
Thank you,
move
Board.
on to, thanks, David. Move on to agenda item 8. We have an action item warned for evaluation of the superintendent. And I think I updated the community at the last board meeting kind of on the areas which the board evaluates the superintendent. We've gone through that process. And I just want to recap that there is going to be a proposed action tonight. David's compensation includes a base salary, includes a contribution to a retirement plan, and then variable compensation. And one of the components of the evaluation last year centered around 3 different goals. One was the initial implementation of metrics to measure progress on the district ends, including reporting to the board. A second was a significant contribution to the board on its master planning and visioning process, including mapping out an action plan to implement the decision or recommendation of the board. And the third was on conduct a leadership review of the central office team, outlining strengths, weaknesses, and succession planning tasks for board review. There are 4 goals associated with this upcoming school year around which variable comp is built. I'll take a minute and just read these quickly. The first is on establishment of concrete metrics or even succinct directional proxies whereby the board can evaluate the progress of our students on the district's ends is critical. Clarity on how subsequent recommendations support the vision for student outcomes is imperative, and meaningful progress has been pretty slow on this particular one. So that's an area where the goal is really associated with concrete metrics here. The second one is on meeting the deadlines for master planning and visioning process that were laid out in the board's 2016 resolutions. And the first there was specifically developing a strong contingency plan for students at Chamberlain, overseeing a baseline study of health, safety, and appropriateness of the learning environment at Chamberlain, and put metrics and guidelines in place to determine if and when a contingency plan would need to be enacted. And we've had ongoing conversations about that. The third is on engaging the community in budget discussions, which demonstrate learnings from this year's process, focus on sustainability, and justifying programming based on outcomes. And the last is the leadership review, as was in the previous year. So the specific recommendation that's been put forward, let me stop there for a minute. Any other comments from the board? Great. The specific recommendation that's been put forward, and I'll look for a motion on this, is a recommendation that David's base salary increase 2.5% to $159,655. that the contribution to a retirement program for the academic year will be $5,000 as it has been in past years, and that performance target pay would be at $4,000 tied with the 4 goals that were just described. So with that, do I have a motion to approve that total compensation program?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, David, thank you, as always, for your contributions, and I do want to highlight that part of the cover letter that's associated with the review process really does highlight a lot of David's contributions throughout the year, and also noted that the board has received many letters from community and staff commending your leadership and consistent focus on student safety and equity. And it's a tribute that many will cite areas where they've disagreed with you on specific initiatives while supporting you in your role as district leader, noting your stability, compassion, and confidence. So thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, and I'd be remiss, just not to, I've done this before. I don't want to overtalk. I appreciate your desire to keep me employed here in this position. I certainly wouldn't sit here unless I had, devoted staff, devoted administrators, in a community that cares about kids. I know we've had our differences at times, but the most important thing I always talk about is the relational trust meter, and the trust, and that trust, when those things are high, then we can go great places. I would say that this has certainly not been a year that, has been without challenge, and, and some sadness along the way. But, I certainly want to continue to work to achieve some of the identified goals that you have there, and I hope that we're able to really focus on that without a lot of other, things that pull away. But it is a microcosm of life in our schools, and there's a lot going on, and this was a year that we had that happening for sure. And I appreciate your support and the time that you all give as well.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to agenda item 9, master planning and visioning.
So we've moved a little bit in this particular direction. Steve and Bridget now have a binder, I think. That's about all you have at the moment. We are trying to get a meeting scheduled, and I think currently the week of the 24th has been proposed. I don't know if that works for either one of you. Somewhere in the week of the 24th, not on the 26th, however, from 8 to noon, but if one of those dates could work, that would be great. And the idea of this is that we've populated a binder now that has kind of all of the criteria that we're looking at, evaluating kind of our current realities and our future realities. And the idea would be is for Steve and Bridget to be able to be a little bit more in depth and informed about where we are, and be able to be more significantly as back to the board. John Stewart has worked with me a little on this in populating information. We've now completed the enrollment projections. We're going to wait to get final numbers for October 1st, although we have the updated report now, but it will be further validated with the October 1 census of students. We've poked at that information a little bit more than we have in the past when we did it with master planning, and challenged some of the thought process, so that will be helpful, I think, to share with both Steve and Bridget. And I think we, again, in the spirit of transparency, we have some very specific things that we're working on regarding the airport with sound concerns, home buyout, and working diligently, with the airport, with Burlington, with the FAA to try to figure out, how much we need to know to be informed about our students. So again, Bridget and Steve will be able to also help provide some additional ideas and direction around that. The idea here around this whole master planning piece would be, and it's not the right word, but that we would be able to come to an end where we would have kind of a decision-making metric that would say, you know, this particular situation is in the, you know, the amber or the green or the red. Rick Marcotte is in a position of here, here, or here. That would be able to be, you know, communicated, talked about significantly with the public, with the board members, so that you're able to then inform the next steps around ourselves as a district. So anyway, that's a little quick highlight on master planning, and if, again, we're open to any time that might work for you. I probably will have John Stewart just sitting in on that, because he's done a little bit of some of the background data, and working on making sure you understand and get your questions answered specific to that. So I don't know if there's any questions.
Not at the moment.
Have we heard anything back from Deke DeCaro at all?
I have not heard anything specific. So again, for transparency purpose, Elizabeth and I met with Deke, and she works for the airport as a consultant, I think, probably. I'm not exactly sure in what capacity, I believe consultant. And she met with us and asked a whole series of questions and came back to us whether or not our questions were answered. I did respond to her and said, we haven't, you know. There's been some responses, but it hasn't been kind of conclusive to the questions that we had asked, specifically to the airport. Deke was doing that, so we have not.
Yeah, we may want to circle back with her.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments? Anything from the public? All right. We'll move on to agenda item 10, policy review discussion. Start with 2.10, curriculum development.
How do you spell Deke, actually? Is it D-E?
DEAC.
C-D-E. All right, thank you.
This is the second reading of the overall policy description, correct?
Correct, and the change there was the district ends.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do we have to go to 3 readings? I just don't recall. Or is it-
Three readings, I
Yeah.
believe, yeah.
Looks good to me on the second reading.
What's that?
Looks good to me on the second reading.
Okay, and this was just a switch from the board's ends to the district ends, so,
We had some places that were pointed out that we were inconsistent,
Yeah.
and so this is really trying to make sure we're being consistent, and this was caught, I found.
Yeah, so the policy then, I think, has been updated. My question, I know, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, is that the actual then, the monitoring report still has the old language in it. And I thought what had happened is we had looked at the monitoring report and said, oh, this isn't quite right, and so we need to update the policy and have the readings. So what is the process then for updating this?
Well,
The executive limitations?
We're gonna
review.
continue, we can continue on our monitoring report, but
Okay.
we do need, we needed to change the policy in order for the monitoring report in order for the
Right.
monitoring report to be accurate to the policy.
Okay.
But I think that the fact that you're in a second reading, I don't wanna say that we gotta hold until you get that approved. That doesn't make,
Right.
from an efficiency perspective.
so the next one is on we have 2 first readings. The 8 travel reimbursement.
So those are some of the required policies that we need to have. So travel reimbursement, just explicitly talking about exactly that. What is the process and how that needs to be implemented. And typically what we do is there is an approval process in here that it calls out, and then we also, how we reimburse for people that are traveling based on the federal government amount that's set.
And both these policies were cited in our grant audit as being policies we need to have in order to continue to get grants.
It looks like a paragraph from the capitalization policy got carried over.
Oh,
on
yeah.
the travel reimbursement.
On the
Oh, yeah, it
implementation.
does. Yep, you're right. Yep, thanks. That last paragraph. Thanks, Steve.
So is this an existing policy?
We do
Is that
not.
what I recall seeing?
I don't think
We
we
don't have
have it.
travel reimbursement, I can't answer on capitalization. John, do you know?
I don't think we do.
Right.
And as far as implementation goes, this may be in the procedure,
Mhm.
but do we put a time frame for these to be submitted for reimbursement? Because that tends to be an issue sometimes.
We will. I mean, part of that is also with our audit, we get dinged in on our audit if it's like, you can't be going along and asking for a reimbursement in June when it occurred in September. We get
Exactly, yeah.
dinged on that. And so, that's part of the procedure, that the reimbursements need to be provided to us.
We
in a-
did have travel as a procedure,
Okay.
but it has to be a policy. You know,
Is
in
there a
other words,
grant?
we had a procedure that tells you that it's based on the federal, and this year it's this much, and so
So
on.
under the implementation where it refers to established written procedure, do we keep the existing procedure?
Yeah, we probably will add the
Or
part that
pieces
you
of it,
just said
anyway.
about time,
Yeah.
to be more clear about it, instead of being verbal.
Mhm.
Any other questions on travel reimbursement?
Can we go ahead with the first reading? And just strike that
Strike
last
the
paragraph?
capitalization out, yeah.
Okay.
That's your,
With
that's
that
your choice, yeah.
modification, yeah. Okay. Any background on capitalization?
Again, this is, part of the due diligence around recommendation from our audit and from best practice from VSBA on our policies. Actually, you and I, Elizabeth, had a little bit of a conversation about some of, the disposal of certain capital goods or materials. So this, I didn't think to bring this up tonight when we were talking, but
Yeah.
it does play into this, I think, and particularly around procedures. And the particular question was if something is given away, or, mass supplies, you probably heard that on the news, that Chamberlain had, outdated math supplies, and they went to Cuba, and that was picked up by, I think, some of our news media today. So typically, when we have computers, we have a procedure around how that happens, because they still are community assets, so we have a process by which we do. But we need to do the same thing for things like that. Even if their value is, we were gonna send it to recycling,
Mhm.
we need to have a procedure that is more aligned to articulate that.
Two questions, I guess, for John. One is, have our external auditors taken a look at this policy? Just-
I would seriously doubt it,
Yeah,
not that I'm aware of.
I'm just wondering if they might want to comment on
Weigh
it.
in on it, yeah.
And question two is, do we need to make any reference to uniform guidance? Or, actually, I don't know if this CFR citation is regarding that, but uniform guidance with respect to grants compliance, or,
That's what was the genesis of these two policies.
okay.
We had a federal grant audit that said, we know you have procedures on these items,
Mhm.
but you need to have a board policy on them. So that's hence the reason for this being here. I don't know what universal guidance,
It's just sort of, and actually, I don't know if it applies as much to K-12 as to higher ed, but I know we had to open up a whole bunch of our policies and put in sort of a standard reference looking to federal uniform guidance standards.
I'd never heard that term,
Okay.
so I'm guessing we don't comply with it.
I mean, some of this for us has been, kind of the pull and tug between policy governance. When prior to policy governance, we had a policy manual and procedure manual that was, I'm probably exaggerating a bit, but it was a lot. And so when we went through that, a group of administrators, along with some outside folks helping us around policy governance transition, went in and said, these are the policies that you need. They fall under the kind of the overarching umbrella of policy governance. You don't need those policies. You do need to keep some of those procedures. But at the same time, required policies have remained, or we've had to be watchful of that. And some of those have changed. And also grant advisement, where we're, using federal grant money, it's not okay for us just to say we're a policy governance district, so
Right.
we need to have
That's-
these. So we've had some of them, as Stuart has said, but then, then we've transitioned. So
I mean,
this
you
is,
could probably draw some lines to the capitalization of assets and to the protection of assets policy governance, but we haven't had anything that had anything to do with transportation, for example, in policy governance. And so it's probably just as easy to make sure you have these mandatory policies that are really clear in a way that's understood.
Yeah. But I think that that's what I was getting at. I mean, number one, at the end of the day, your external auditor is going to be the one that's signing off. Like, we do a federal single audit. Yeah, so, I mean, if they're looking to this, you know, they may have a suggestion. I'm just thinking, you know, if we can get some free advice from them.
We do have a thick book of business office procedures that contains a lot of this stuff.
Okay.
So if the auditor were to ask, we would give him that.
All right.
And we do a single audit. But this, as Stuart said, these two have to not only be procedures, but enshrined in policy by the board.
Okay.
That said, sometimes whoever does our audit sometimes can change. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
I
they
mean, I think
can,
that's part of
yeah.
it. We had
Yeah.
one not long ago and it was fine. And then the person's interpretation of, or persons, on what needs to be done changes. So, I mean, our job isn't necessarily to refute every auditor's issue, but again, I think part of that is what governs us and how we are controlling, you know, these things are important, right? There's transparency there, so.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I've just a separate quick issue on, since we're on policy review, and since Wendell reminded me of that student publications legislation that came out. There, if you could check with the Superintendent's Association, that there was some talk of the possibility that there would be model policy for implementing the student publication freedoms. So you may want to touch base with the folks there and see if in fact they are developing such an item.
Thanks.
Anything else in the public on 3 or 1 second reading or 2 first readings? All right, so that will satisfy the 2 first readings on D8 and E3. And we'll move on to agenda item 11. Bridget, we're on this one now. This is warned for action, but we indicate in it is predicated on the review of the actual policy, which will have a 3rd reading, I assume, at the next board meeting. 2.10 curriculum development and review. I think that note's made on page 2 there.
So I don't know how you'd like to go about doing this. We can go through it, answer questions.
We went briefly through it at the time that originally it was picked up that it said board instead of district, or had been recommended, and then it was pointed out that that was the policy. So last time we didn't do the review that would have been scheduled when we did the first reading. But there were some questions. I did change some of the language in the summation, and I added a little more evidence in terms of the South Burlington High School Path to Proficiency, because there was an ask for kind of the placemat kind of piece that we had done in previous years, which basically shows the direction we're going in proficiency-based graduation by 2020. So if there are other specific questions to this, I will also add that after the meeting I had yesterday, I know that next year I'll be presenting even newer and better evidence in terms of, because we'll be aligning with Every Student Succeeds Act in terms of their requirements around curriculum and assessment.
Any comments from the board, how you'd like to go through this, or general observations at this point? I know I still struggle a little bit with the revision of the interpretation. I think it would be my expectation that curriculum and development would follow the district ends, and it isn't quite clear to me that it's doing that yet. Because I think when it goes into the, basically it has sections on expectation using student data, continuous improvement, and so forth, the graduation policy, flexible pathways, but it's not clear to me where it links back to the ends.
So Elizabeth, if you look at what we call the poster, and I think I gave you the one for social studies,
But yep,
everywhere it says SBE on the side, those are the South Burlington ends. So we say that when somebody is doing the geography,
gotcha, okay.
those, and so for every single one of our high school and now middle school, high school, and this year will be high school, middle school, elementary, in that final empty box
Mhm.
to the side will be a relationship to the ends that are so named. And that's for every subject area. So that is one of the places of alignment.
So the evidence that's presented in this particular monitoring report is an example specific to social studies.
Right, so I could have given you the English one, the math one, the science one. They all
And
exist.
I guess my question is that adequate once we get to evaluating the monitoring report?
Right, I totally understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not prepared to answer that myself, but thank you for pointing that out. Other observations or comments, questions from the board?
So do we want to go ahead and approve this at this point, even though it's going to change once we've done the third reading, or?
I
Should
think we could do the review with a contingency on the policy change.
Right.
So this one is just, this is the top level one, right? We
Correct.
don't have any,
Yeah.
there's no
There's not some-
subpoints.
right.
So actually, we have to, that was the issue, that has to be approved separately.
Yeah, on the cover, but we could put the contingency in there that be approved once the,
We could do that,
you
yeah.
know.
This one has no sub points to it? Okay. So, is that the board's pleasure? We'll go through this in anticipation that the top-level policy will shift from board ends to district ends? All right, so I'll just do a read then, since we are going to take action on this. This is on the Executive Limitations Monitoring Report Summary for 2.10, which is Curriculum Development and Review. And this policy states that the superintendent shall not allow the district to be without written curricula aligned with Vermont standards and district ends policies that are coordinated across all grade levels and schools. Further, the superintendent shall not fail to review the curricula periodically based upon student performance results, learning opportunities data, new research, and updated content knowledge with the goal of all students meeting the district ends policy. Reasonable interpretation?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
Is there adequate data?
Yes.
And we are in compliance.
Mhm.
So that will be contingent on the policy change. All right?
So if there are going to be some significant changes next time, if we could plan a more full presentation of it. I mean, we're expecting that
Yes.
tonight, but really,
Yeah, I actually am going to need to do a presentation probably early fall on the new continuous improvement plan process in the state of Vermont, which will be aligned much more with the educational quality standards, and will change significantly what our continuous improvement plans look like now. There will have to be a district one that we've never had to have before, and actually one or more of you will have to be on the committee. So with those things being said, we'll just leave it at that for now. But not a quorum of you.
excellent.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 12, update on negotiations. Bridget, do you want to start on support staff?
Support staff, there was a planning meeting this morning to talk about support staff. We don't have another date scheduled yet at this point, but we are hoping to work with them to get another date reasonably soon, to sort of move things forward with support staff. So I think that's about the
And
update. Martin, unless you have anything else.
Yeah, I just would add that the legislation threw a bit of a wrench into where we were in the process. I felt fairly close on the health insurance component of the total compensation, and we're looking at that a little closer now, given the legislation. So that's a part that we'll have to be talking more with the staff negotiation team.
And just for the RETN and the public, Martin's referring to Act 85 or H542,
Right.
which anticipates a reduction in the general access to the general fund by district or SU to be determined based on a formula with an expectation that districts, we may receive a target kind of in the mid-August timeframe in terms of, I'll use clawback as a description of that, but I'm not sure what it will look like. And we've tried to do some interpretation of the formula based on the example that was sent out by
Joint Fiscal
Joint
Office.
Fiscal Office. But it's a little bit difficult to determine, particularly based on the fact that the reduction in the general ed fund is directly linked to health care, and the new health care plans don't go into effect until January 1st, but it appears that the JFO target is based on a full year. So we're trying to work with, I know John's working closely with Brad James at AOE, as are a lot of other districts, but we're probably a little ways off from knowing what that looks like, at least for South Burlington.
But I think that the key is that we've asked for $37 million plus from the education fund.
Mm-hmm.
And next year, for the second half of the school year, some amount of that is going to be taken out. They're not going to give us the full amount that we've asked for in our budget. That's what's going to happen. We don't know what that amount is, but it's certainly affecting the negotiations with the teachers and with the staff. 'cause
And just
that's
a
where-
reminder, the board, in the budget that was approved by voters, we had already included $50,000 specific to healthcare in that budget. So
Savings.
our target would be in addition to that, which has already been included.
Right.
So Martin, do you want to give an update on
Yeah.
SBEA
Very quickly, we did receive the fact finders report Monday.
Monday? Yeah.
It seems so long ago. On Monday, there's a 10-day period after that where that information can't be released to the public. We have our next negotiation session, post-fact-finding report, scheduled for August 3rd. And we're also looking to schedule a second negotiation, if necessary, in the August timeframe before school commences. That's it.
Any other questions or comments? Any from the public? All right. Okay, we'll move on to setting the agenda for the July 26th work session and subsequently the August 2nd regular meeting. So one of
We
my,
had one item we said we might put on here, right? 26th, but that might have been.
well, the 26th, part of that working session was intended to be in public, and it was around a discussion of governance and board self-evaluation. In terms of preparation for that discussion, is there anything we ought to make sure that, it was on board governance, training, and self-assessment. That was in public session. Is there any materials the board would want to make sure you get in advance of that? I think Steve and Alex, you're kind of going through the standard training as your schedules permit, correct? I think that's the
online trainings?
online trainings, yeah.
Yeah, I think completed them a while ago. I don't know where.
And individually, have you had opportunities to meet?
I haven't, we haven't dialed back in with Alex or Steve around, other other training options, just because of the frequency of our schedule in the past. The self-assessment, I could do, I think through the VSBA, we could do a little bit of some deeper digging on what
Well,
currently people are
could we
using.
maybe bring the evaluation tool that we were using
Sure.
previously, and at least the newer board members can see the self-evaluation tool? In the past, every other meeting, we'd go through a board self-evaluation at the end of the meeting and invite any members from the public to provide feedback as well. That might be a good springboard. That kind of fell out of favor over time. I'm trying to recall. I think the actionability of it was a little limited. Any
Yeah.
comments, Martin?
It was a waste of time.
It was an effort to acknowledge that the board
Well-
required some review of its own process and progress and opportunities to improve. So it wasn't giving us that information. And as a result, I think that would be a good springboard to say, how do we ensure that the board is going through a more meaningful evaluation of its own activities, at least on an annual basis?
I like the annual basis part of that.
At least.
So I'm happy to, I can send it out with the packet that goes out, or
Okay.
on the 26th, or?
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
idea.
Okay.
And maybe it would make sense to look at the board trainings that are available through VSBA with a calendar, and we could identify, or at least have a discussion around where the board might choose to participate as an entity, where versus individuals might want some selective training. And I'm trying to think about the policy governance. Is there a good baseline document for the newer board members and a refresher for the more senior board members, just around how we've utilized revised policy governance?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think,
It might be helpful to look at some of the documentation when we adopted policy governance, to look at that documentation, and that could serve as a basis for that conversation. So I think even examples of today where we're running into some issues where policy governance doesn't serve the way the district needs to operate. And I know historically, Martin and I in particular, having served on the board for a while, after we adopted policy governance, we refer to how we practice it as revised, because the process has not allowed for some of the needs that have come up by the district. And maybe there's an opportunity to kind of come up with a couple of the tabletop examples. 'Cause I think actually VSB may have some of those.
I think that part should really be the focus even of how it's working, or where we might improve. And I would think we probably have plenty of our own examples of the last couple of years that would work as something we can now step back and kind of evaluate how that worked in our context of policy governance,
we've used the word modified.
Yeah.
modified.
Right.
Well, that's only given us the rationale to not adhere to it strictly, so.
All right.
Right.
Okay.
So that will be that agenda, and then I believe we have an executive session on negotiation strategy with support staff and teachers. And then the possibility of inclusion on legal services regarding a real estate matter. Is that a sure thing, or is that a placeholder at this
It's a
point?
placeholder.
Okay. Any other comments on the agenda for next week? So we'll start in public session and go into executive
I'll
session.
try to clear that up, so again, if that's not needed, then it should come off the executive session.
Okay. All right, and the agenda for August 2nd?
Patient
Yeah.
policies, you can take off 2.1 because you just did that.
Anything else on this?
Didn't we talked about adding something at the beginning of this meeting? I cannot remember what it was.
No,
Didn't we? Am I hallucinating? I'll look at
looking
the
at my
RETN
notes.
feed and see what it was. What was it? The resolution, thank you.
Yeah, why don't
well,
we,
under the city, the
Yeah,
city,
that would be under that?
Yeah.
Okay, all right,
Mhm.
okay. All
but
right.
I think it's fine, we should add,
we can
add
spell it
okay.
out there and see if, yeah.
Yeah, I would add it to
Yep.
the agenda so it's clear that that's gonna be part of it.
That's
My
a short
short-term-
attention span.
Yeah, that's really bad short-term memory, wow.
got it.
All right, anything else on the August 2nd regular meeting agenda? It looks
So-
like there's quite a few, the normal start of the school year
Mm-hmm.
lease resolutions.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Will we get those, John, ahead of the meeting?
Yes, and some of those are in
We
your,
will make every effort to get it. We're working on it right now.
Okay.
I hope to have them to you for that meeting.
And those are all action, because they must be over the 50,000?
No, this is to actually approve the lease that would purchase these things. The lease, these are financed by lease purchase.
Is it one action, or is it individual action?
It's one action.
Oh, okay. And is the consent agenda an action on the consulting services? Or is that under the threshold?
Usually you,
no, it should be called out as an action, because it's over the 15,000. It's gonna be, it's in that, remember, this is the structural mechanical consulting on the high school, middle school.
So-
Just received information about them. Yeah, you gotta review them.
So the video camera system, is that security cameras or is
Yes.
that?
yes.
You may wanna-
Upgrading that system.
well, you may want
Spell that out a little
to
bit.
spell it out, security camera system on here. There's certain individuals who may want to attend.
Good point.
Okay, agenda.
Can you make sure to add that,
Sorry.
the video surveillance camera system, yeah.
Bridget?
I know Steve and I will see it because it's in the master plan and visioning packet. I don't know how the rest of the board feels about having a quick discussion about enrollment levels and as we head into the school year. Just because we haven't, as a board, talked about it in a while, and just to make sure there are no surprises or anything before school gets started.
Yep, you can,
I don't know if that's under superintendent's report.
We have
maybe.
it by-
Second.
By then?
Well, why don't I just I can give you an enrollment update. I'm
Okay.
just working on that.
Do you want to just put it under superintendent?
Sure.
Could, I have one other thing I just want to throw out there, and not necessarily for this agenda, but just the budget development, given what has gone on, having that come earlier in the process than, I'm not sure when it's planned right now, but I think we need to step that up a little bit earlier.
Gotcha.
All right. Seeing no other comments, we'll move on to agenda item 14. We've got quite a laundry list of future agenda items accumulating here.
We're working on some of the federal and state policies, but, I've got to do more of that with you folks right now around updating those, but we're working on them.
I think based on the meeting next week, we should be able to address the meeting evaluation.
And should we, as part of our board governance next week, talk about the managing monitoring reports? Just plan on trying to address that.
Do we still have a relationship that we need the Common Roots report?
Well, I mean, I have maintained that, Stuart has maintained that, we have had, there's gonna be a change in some staffing that, we've had an individual who has also been a teacher who's
Mhm.
also part of the Common Roots part,
Right.
but, we still have a relationship and actually have a meeting, I think, coming up with, Common Roots folks next week, I think, but I mean, it's a relationship, you know, that we have, like we do many. I don't know that the board really needs to have
I
a
think,
direct connect to that.
I think previously it was, when it was grant funded, I think it received an update. Is it still grant funded?
We give
From a school
some,
standpoint?
some dollars to, not much. Some dollars go towards, I wanna say,
Well, Common Roots has provided an educator at the elementary schools to do food education with our kids, no cost to us for years. And they have, in the past, I don't know what their future intent is, help with the farm-to-school connection as well.
I don't know, there's been some, I'm not articulating what we actually do for them, other than give them space and time and all of that, but we've
Well,
typically
I-
had it on as an update, you know?
Yeah, I guess maybe if we could just ask you to evaluate whether that needs to continue to be on here.
Mhm.
And I think if it's requiring school resources in any capacity, as any other program might be, it might be worth continuing, but may not have to be an individual placeholder.
Yeah, it seems to be in the weeds more
Mhm.
when we're talking about policy governance, that we don't need to
Yep.
to get into that issue.
I mean, that said, I think as Stuart articulated, they have, you know, the program has helped us immensely of bringing in and asking good questions and farm to school, farm to table stuff, so it's been really helpful, and,
Yeah, I think it's.
integral part of that.
yeah.
But that said, I think you're absolutely right.
No, I think it's a great program, but it's just not necessarily one that the board needs any oversight of, I mean, date, you know, so.
Any other comments on future agenda items? All right, we'll move on to considering several meeting minutes. June 19th.
Global comment, if you don't have a quorum of the board, can you have any motions?
I mean, they were all warned.
We don't, it would be by consensus anyway, so we don't take action on, I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood.
No, I mean, like, you have motions approved and things, I'm just wondering, can the board actually approve motions if you don't have a quorum?
Nope, I think so.
No, we cannot, but where are you seeing?
Well, I'm
this,
sorry,
Steve?
just so, June 19th.
It's listed. as
Yeah,
a-
there's like,
but
under
not-
executive session, the motion was approved and just, you know, but only it was
Yeah, it just,
Elizabeth and
it's,
Bridget
yeah,
at the
it's-
meeting. So
it
that-
just
that's-
ended the time that, in which you met, right? It's,
I mean, whatever.
Oh,
I might be being too picky by half
No,
here.
no,
just the meeting ended, no motion needed, right? Or,
that is correct.
yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's a good call, because it got warned, but there wasn't a quorum of the board in attendance.
It's appropriate to warn the meetings. I mean,
Sure.
there is guidance
Oh, yeah.
around there about being transparent about meetings that you're having. Again,
There was a chance that the third person showed up,
Yeah.
but anyway, yeah, so the same comment then would
That's
apply to
good.
the
Yeah.
27th.
good catch.
So the modification with that modification, June 19 is covered. 21st. Any comments or questions? You just have the, it's a regular meeting. Okay, seeing none, move on to June 27th. Wait, 27th, that's an upcoming.
June
June 27th, sorry. In the wrong
Nice
month.
to go back.
Yeah, go back. So that would be one where we modify the motion being approved.
Yep.
And July 10th? Okay. By consensus, those are all reviewed and approved. So we'll move on to agenda item 16, tax anticipation note.
So I think John's updated you a little bit, or some of the board members, that with the way in which the money is dispensed from the city. There's a period of time that we're concerned about meeting payroll. And so when that occurs, when there's a concern like that, and this is a concern from John, that we go out with a tax anticipation note and borrow. So he has sent out bids in the amount of $3 million to bridge that gap. And we've received back 3 and got one from Union Bank at 1.19. I don't know, John, anything else you want to add to the?
This is a short-term issue just to get us through the summer months when we were afraid the tax bills would not come in on time between X and H 542 and the delay in our own tax rate being set. It doesn't look like that's going to be a big deal, but we do want to move ahead with this given what looks like a tougher cash flow situation this summer than usual. We would borrow this, it's our plan, from July 20th to September 30th, about $5,000 worth of possible interest expense, but we would only borrow what we needed and pay it back as soon as we could. Got a competitive rate there from Union Bank. I was pleased to see that. And we could go ahead with this. This is a fairly routine thing for boards to do from time to time.
Yeah, we've been lucky, for new board members, we've been lucky that we haven't, and the release by the city, in getting our money early, we've not had to do this. And part of that, as John said, was connected to our passage of our budget and the setting of the tax rate. I think we probably would have been okay had that occurred earlier, but here we are.
I know tax bills were received today, so
Yes.
they did come out. All right, do I have a motion to approve the tax anticipation note in the amount of $3 million with Union Bank at an interest rate of 1.19%?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes.
I have documentation for each of you to sign.
Okay, we got
I'd like to
the
do that tonight
binder,
to
yeah.
expedite this. Thanks.
All right, we'll move on to the lease financing bid, agenda item 17.
So,
This is just for the financing, not the,
Not the purchasing.
that's
no.
correct. That's right.
I'm sorry, you were about to say that,
No,
weren't you?
You did it, fine. Brevity's
Quite, no.
something I'm working on.
Want to walk us through this?
John,
Yeah, we have for several years, I think, here, financed some of our bigger capital items from the stewardship plan through a 5-year lease. The budget this year included the one-to-one computer systems, the surveillance camera system, the accounting and HR computer systems, 1 bus, we reduced that from 2 during the budget process, and a dump truck, total of $707,000. We, due to the technicalities of this kind of a bid, we let a consultant actually put these out to bid for us. They got 5 different quotes, ranging from 2.98 to 3.54% over a period of 4 or 5 years, depending on the item being purchased. We're ready to move ahead with the lease documentation, and the company would like to make sure that this is okay with the board before they expend money generating documentation. So I'd appreciate it if we could approve this and move this process along.
Any questions or comments? The group that we contract with to take these bids out, what do we pay them for a fee?
They take an application fee of $650, and they must get some kind of percentage of the lease from the leasing company itself, but we don't pay them anything else. Their whole fee basically is included in these rates
So it's the companies that pay the
Right.
fee,
somehow.
which we ultimately pay for in some way.
I'm sure.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the lease financing bid in the amount of $707,000 with USB under the terms proposed?
So moved.
Second?
Any additional questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. All right, we'll move on to the consent agenda.
So you have positions in there. We needed to add the resignation of Jennifer Opel, and her letter was in your it was not in your packet. It's a sidebar, or in your handouts. Jennifer Opel is a ELL teacher at Chamberlain School, has been for a long time, and resignation.
I'd like to propose that we take Krista, the 2 leaves of absences off the agenda at this moment, just for some further discussion. I know you've provided some specific data.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask also a question? Did we need to discuss Joe McDonald anymore, the curriculum area supervisor? I thought the information that we've gotten answered the questions that we had last time. We pulled it off, but I just want to flag that to make sure we're still fine.
Do you want to take that one off?
No, I'm not. No, I'm just flagging whether we are all satisfied that we.
We did take that off the agenda last time and ask for some follow-up information on the role of the CAS in this particular area, content area.
Mm-hmm.
Did people have a chance to go through that?
And I apologize because I didn't give this out to you before, but this was by your place is also the job description for our curriculum area supervisor, particularly in this particular job group at the high school. And then also on the back, or the second page of that, current numbers of teachers supervised by our curriculum area supervisors and the number of folks. This particular question that came up last time was in response to the curriculum area supervisor position around health, physical education, and driver's ed. And so this is in response to your questions there.
And we're talking about 0.4% of the position, correct?
Correct.
If there are no questions, we can,
No, you need a motion to move the consent agenda.
it's not an action, so we would just, what we'll be moving on from is the discussion of the hires and the bids for shades will be approved, have considered reviewed. I gotta come up there with the right language.
You got it.
No action.
Mm-hmm.
So the specific question, I know I had asked David on the leaves of absence, were really kind of what our history has been around leaves. Some of the concern I have is just the timing of the leaves and whether or not contracts had been signed, sort of the nature of personal versus professional leaves, the ability to backfill these positions if leaves are granted at this point in the school year, or before the school year, and then the notion that if there are specific deliverables, if someone is looking to take a professional leave and is linking some assessment of other program or some professional development that may go on during the leave, is there a requirement to sort of require that there be a deliverable when the individual returns to the district in some capacity? So those were some of my specific questions. Do you want to take a minute and kind of review the information?
Yeah, so also at your place, and send this out beforehand, is the leave request. And this is only a little bit of a look back. I went back to 2011 up to kind of what's being proposed. Obviously, there's a lot more history here, I think, and well before me. This just kind of gives you the teacher in this particular case making the request, the school year, whether it was approved or denied, whether there was a second-year request, although some of this is not totally complete, and then did the teacher return, was kind of the bigger buckets that we tracked. And by no means am I 100% complete. I know that there are some things in here, like our Roland Fellows, that we've had primarily at the high school, actually, I think. Those were actually leaves, but they were funded by the Roland Fellowship Program, and there was significant deliverables that came back from those staff members, and in fact, they stayed. I didn't include them. That's kind of, I should have done that. I think, you can see a little bit of some trend here where, somebody who requests, I think there's some fragmented FTEs that individuals requested and were allowed then to resign 50%. Some of these were in job shares, primarily at the elementary school. Some of these that were given a year then resigned, that following year. We've had some fractional FTEs where individuals, again, I have to be careful, some of these, without calling them out, are also, attributed to life issues, or either, it could be aging parents, could be children, could be a variety of other issues here that do that. I would say that there are certain positions that are harder to fractionalize leaves than others. Obviously, at the high school, that's not high school, middle school, where fractions can be a little bit easier applied. It's less easy at the elementary level, and in some cases, even at the middle school, it's harder to be doing that. So the two requests come, to you under the leaves of absence at the .40 social study teacher at the high school, that's Krista Hurling, and the 1.0 FTE science math teacher, Eric Stone, at the high school.
And were both of those signed contracts?
Both of those had signed contracts at 1.0.
And how about the question of ability to backfill?
Yep. So one of the first questions, usually when we get those late dates that are back to the administrators, can we adequately fill this position? And in some cases, I will tell you that, administrators will say, I don't know what I'm going to do right now. It's a predicament. And I think, one of the fundamental questions for me is there going to be a loss to the delivery, to the education delivery? And so these two questions were asked of these two employees, back to the high school, and Patrick and his team. And we are able to adequately and appropriately fill those positions. And again, this was a leave of absence. That means it's a 1-year leave for both Krista and Eric Stone. I would say to you, if we couldn't backfill those, again, some of these are in pretty, as far as numbers of staff within these departments, programs, there's staff there that can do that. So the response back is certainly they would be missed for the year, but we can appropriately backfill, and in some cases gives some of our more junior teachers an opportunity to step up and teach content that maybe they have been looking forward to in the past.
So the two individuals that, looks like there's only two that we denied leave. What was the basis for the denial of the leave?
Some of this was a second-year request on both situations.
On both of those?
Yeah.
Had we approved an initial year?
Yeah.
For each of these individuals, and then just we would not approve a second year?
Yes, because I didn't go back before 11, though. Before the year 2011, they were approved. They were given a year prior to that. Follow me?
Well,
so the request came up again in 15-16.
Oh, so it wasn't
the second request of another year.
Second year in a row. It was a previous time they took a year off.
Right.
So it looks like for Amy Posadente, it was.
That was
the
second
That
year,
one was.
yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, there we are, right, but not for Kim.
Yeah, and the one observation I'd have, and there's sort of 5 notwithstanding the 2 that have been requested right now, 3 we don't know the outcome of, but of the 25 or 26 that are accounted for, it looks like 6 returned, 2 returned at reduced FTEs, but 13 ultimately resigned. So about 50% are resigning after a leave, whether they were a fractional position or not. And I guess my fundamental question is, is this an acceptable practice within the district? Is it something we should be paying attention to? Is this an area that administration feels it needs to develop more guidelines around in terms of approving leaves? I guess,
Yeah.
I don't know all the questions to ask, but
No,
that's
I
my
think it's a fair
observation with the
question.
information.
In general, I'm in favor of allowing people the opportunity to continue to grow and learn by going other places and asking and having the ability to have contrast from what we do and what they're doing. And when I look at, individuals like a Joy Sheehy, who, is on this in 2012-13, there's no question, she went away and there was a great benefit. So in general, I'm in favor of that for the deliverables that come back to the district. I will tell you that I haven't tracked it like this. So I think there's some merit in this for me and for the administrators to say, I'm going to exaggerate, I'm getting 15 of these a year. That's deploying resources that might be hard for us to keep up with. So I think this is a document. I'm not saying this exact document, but it would be good for us to be tracking it. I think that's a takeaway for this. These particular 2 individuals, I am in favor, and I supported this going forward to you because I, number one, feel that we can backfill the positions appropriately. I think in the case of Eric Stone, I think the takeaways and the deliverables on the return will be important. In this case, back to the high school and perhaps the whole district around, this is what I've learned. This is what I've brought there. So there are, again, not just these 2, there are components of these leaves that there's more to the story here, without pulling out one particular individual. As I said earlier, there's some life circumstances in some of these, the balance between that journey of, aging parents, children, and the desire to still be, effective in the classroom is in part intermixed in some of these as well. Bottom line is you asked me and the administrators to make sure what's being delivered to students is of high quality, and these particular requests, I believe we can continue to do that.
So who takes the responsibility to sort of work on what the deliverables might be?
That's really, that is myself, that's the administrator, who is working with me on this particular, the leave where it happens. I think where I haven't articulated that, I think there have been some pretty significant deliverables that have come back from our Roland Fellows, the Joy Sheehys, I'm picking on the high school, but there are some pretty significant things, and I would say a lot of the outcomes and changes that we've had is a result of some of these leaves. Not all, but a good number of them.
Well, and to be frank, I imagine there's benefits, but the individuals have to return for the district to realize those
That's right.
benefits. So the question is, if the track record has been about a 50% attrition rate, are there deliverables in the form of a report, or if there's a competitive curriculum, or if there's a standard of practice that could be transferred, or something that the district is ensured, independent of the individual's decision at the end of the leave, that there's still some benefit to the district?
Yep, it's reasonable.
It looks to me as though the reasons for requesting leave can be very diverse, and some of these leaves, like you mentioned, Eric Stone, Joyce Sheehy, these are what you could almost call a sabbatical, in which they're going somewhere else, they're learning something innovative, and they're bringing it back. And in other cases, you have people who are taking care of, sick family members, and, whether the family member gets
Well,
better or
I'm
not.
not, I'm generalizing here a little
Yeah.
bit on that. And again, sabbaticals, although for us contractually, sabbatical language is very different than what this is, because sabbaticals, there's no money that follows, and
Yeah,
to us, the district dollar is that these individuals are stop paid, the benefits stop, their seniority stops, you know, their, if their teacher's
guaranteed
retirement, all
some-
those things are stopped.
They're guaranteed some comparable employment on their return, correct?
There's some
Yeah.
provisions in the contract that said they should return back into a, I'm gonna say comparable position within their licensed area. That's not exactly what it says, but that's close.
right, but I think the reason for requesting the leave is obviously varied, and it'd be interesting to know if there's a correlation between the reason for requesting the leave and the outcome, and whether they return or not.
So it seems to me that the question I have is the district in somehow a better position if we say no? And I don't see that we are. I mean, I do think we should indicate to these individuals that they need to let us know by early next year whether they're returning, because you know, if they don't tell us by a certain date, or if they tell us they're not returning, we want to have as long a time to get as quality of an individual back in as they are. I mean, you know, the other thing is certainly, and this probably is a little difficult to have as another question to ask, but I'll ask it anyway, is that do we want these teachers, I mean, are these good teachers who we want back? And usually the answers, always so far, the answer has been yes in my mind, that I do want to see this teacher come back. So I do want to, both of them. So I want to see that position is made available. I just don't see how we're benefiting at this point, unless, you know, administration said, we have this hotshot person who we can hire right now to take this position, and is going to be just great, and we need to provide that person with more than just a 1 year. In that case, it's a little bit different, but that's not what I'm hearing is this case right now.
Well, more importantly, we have no backfill. And
Right, and we do have backfill, and I suppose even if we said no, it's not necessarily the case that either of these teachers would stick around, but possibly.
I mean, places where things like this are really, really difficult, or, you know, smaller schools, you know, where you have hardly, you know, you have a staff of 2 in a department or something like that, right? I'm thinking smaller high schools or middle schools. And, you know, we're well-positioned within Chittenden County. We're a place where, you know, we've got, you know, good qualified, you know, folks that come and work, either student teaching, you know, TAP program folks, you know, we're desirable that way, even if it's a 1-year experience opportunity. It just so happens in this particular case, you know, and the response back from Patrick is that we've got, you know, we've got people who are within these departments who have strong expertise in teaching the content in which the individuals that are leaving, and it provides an opportunity for them also, you know, to have the opportunity to, you know, to ready themselves to teach a curriculum in which they're really excited about. And that's rejuvenating in some ways. Yes, there's a backfill there, but again, within a department the size of these 2 particular employees, there is opportunity there for us. And again, that was a clear-up question, you know, are we able to do this? And if the answer was no, I mean, then I'd be in a different place in the recommendation.
Steve, did you have a question?
No, I was just curious what our contractual obligations were. I mean, is it completely at will, or is there language in our contract about there shall not reasonably or unreasonably be withheld or anything? Just wondering what our grounds are for approving or denying, or our obligations for approving or denying.
It's really at the discretion of the board.
Complete discretion.
Yeah,
Okay.
And, you know, it speaks specifically, superintendent, there's deadlines currently within the contract of a leave of absence of March 1st, I believe, although it can be waived, you know, by the superintendent or designee, and then making that, you know,
Okay.
to the board.
Right, yeah, it's just the timing issues in there, not the basis.
Any other questions or comments? So is there general consensus to accept administration's recommendations on the 2 leaves?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for the discussion, and I do, I think this information gathering is helpful from my
Yep.
perspective to sort of see what the
Helpful for me
trends
to
are,
look
and
at,
to
too.
be consistent in the practice, too.
So I do recall, even though my short-term memory's really bad, my longer-term memory's a little bit better, that with one of these past instances, we had the same, very similar discussion. And I think we did want to have some more definitive guidelines, or at least a discussion of whether we should have more definitive guidelines. And I think that was lost in history somewhere. And I'm wondering if we should, or if we think that this more ad hoc basis that we are proceeding on in this kind of request is.
Would you like to put it on future agenda items?
Probably, yes.
All right.
Have a good night, Patrick.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Patrick.
The leaves of absence.
So, help me out with clarity. Leaves of absence is like protocol, procedures, practice, something like that?
Yeah, it's tough because you're talking about they have different. I don't know if I think the question one is whether we even need to have guidelines, but I guess that's in part what you can come up with because there's such varied bases for asking for the leave and very varied ability to backfill, et cetera. So it may not be possible, but I think we should at least
there's
look
some-
into
Well,
it.
There's some
it may
things
be
that-
just really documenting
Yeah.
what your decision-making process has been
Mhm.
historically, so there's some framework.
Thank you.
Again,
Yeah.
when you look at sort of the master planning and visioning conversations or any big topics, it's how do those discussions survive this board's existence, your role as superintendent, anybody's
Yeah.
role within the district.
Right. Yeah, it could be relatively informal, but it's guidelines like that.
All right, agenda item 19, AP orders, 49, 51, and 2. Any questions or discussion on those? All right, seeing none. Agenda item 20, we have an AP order check to the Howard Center in the amount of $103,274.08. That administration is seeking action on.
You've in the past asked for, kind of, what increment of time this is. I mean, some of these, just because of the billing structures, are hard to pin down. I mean, we'll continue to try to work on that, but in some cases, it's not easy, just, you see these and you wonder if is it a quarter, is it a month? So we're gonna continue to work on trying to do that. I didn't mean to interrupt your.
These are all labeled May, but you don't know if it was for April and May.
I know that that's a desire that the board would like, so I'm acknowledging that.
And just out of curiosity, John, does the audit practice ever look at outside, vendors or service providers during the audit?
I would say no. I think there may be a role for the state special ed people to review some of these placements to make sure they're, meeting certain standards. I'm pretty sure the state does that, but I don't believe I've ever seen an independent financial auditor try to do that.
And I don't know, I can't speak to the state side. I can speak to some of our local, like special educators. Joanne Godak and a lot of her colleagues have done, I don't want to call it an audit, but have done a kind of a cost analysis assessment, which is why we have run, some of our own programming
Right.
collaboratively.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but these are all ultimately billable hours, correct? By various therapists or
Correct.
professionals?
I don't want to say all of them are, but most of them are.
Okay.
I think I'm not sure how they make these tuition
Oh, because there's
billings.
tuition in there.
These are tuition billings. They may just be a
Straight
monthly
out.
rate.
And they
For us.
capture then the reimbursements
Okay.
Yeah.
on their filings.
But that's been the practice within
Mhm.
that service, okay. So do I have a motion to approve this AP order to Howard Center?
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye?
The motion passes. Any other business, David? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?